Frank, we've hit the final episode,
Final episode,
season finale of bringing your brand strategy to life. Today we're
Yeah.
going to talk about marketing tactics and execution, but we've talked about so many things before that. So before people would roll into tactics and execution, like what are the videos that we've done and kind of the steps that a brand would go through before they would actually get into execution?
Yeah, let's go through a quick overview. I think it could be helpful for anyone watching. By the way, if you are watching, we have a kind of a series list on our YouTube page, which will probably be easier to remember what I'm about to say. If you go there, we've just labeled basically the series, The Essentials of Brand Building, in which we go through and we've talked about kind of a sequential approach to take to that, starting from a high level of your business all the way down to how to make sure that you're executing well. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. So some of those things were, the first one was purpose and vision. That's why you exist beyond money. Brand identity, who you want to be aspirationally or what you want your brand image to be aspirationally. Your growth goals, so some more objective criteria for growth, whether that's revenue or goals related to revenue or profitability, usually within like a 9 to 18 month segment. Category, the group of solutions you fit within, kind of like your type of offering. And then position and point of view. So that's kind of the largest chunk that we spent time on. How do you frame what you do? How do you do something that's differentiated, relevant and sustainable? And messaging, the first kind of like major touch point of communication that reflects all of those things to the market, which brings us to what we're talking about today, and that is tactics and execution. So on high level, we're going to talk about you've basically designed or developed your brand strategy. What are the things that we want to pay attention to? What are the priorities when we're rolling that out within marketing materials, within marketing initiatives? So that's a little bit of a summary. Amanda, I don't know if you have anything to add to that before we dive in.
No, I think that really well covers kind of where we're at and how we got to where we are today.
Sweet.
First question, how should we view and use messaging in brand building?
So messaging is the first touch point, like we talked about. I'll kind of anchor this back to our previous video. So we've told the reason why we want to bring up messaging is narrative, right? The narrative is what you say that you do, the story that you tell. And so when we look in brand building, how that should be executed, we want to make sure that we're being consistent with that across any channel that you're using and connecting everything you do within your marketing back to this brand strategy, your positioning. One thing I'll preface with that is that depending on the industry, company size, all those different types of things, there's nearly endless tactics, endless touch points. As Web3 becomes a thing, there's going to be even more touch points. Every one of those is not going to be right for every brand. And so covering all of those is also not necessarily within the scope of this video. More so what we want to talk about here is kind of a philosophy to keep in mind. And that's what we mentioned, connectivity and consistency. Connectivity, connecting everything you do back to your strategy, back to the narrative that you want to create in the market. It can be really easily forgotten. So when you do work on strategy and strategic decisions, those at the time can feel very conceptual. You feel like, yeah, this is ideal, this is really cool, this is a massive idea. But then when you go to execute things, it can be easy to revert back into your kind of like day-to-day without really shifting or changing anything, or at least making sure that it connects back to that strategy. But strategy is wasted if it's not actually acted on. The art is in the doing. And so making sure everything connects back to that and reviewing that constantly. We did that this morning for our own team, just reviewing where we want to go, how we plan to get there. And then consistency is the same content, the same message, the same narrative that you're sharing against all channels and all touch points. And the reason why is because when those two things happen, when you're connected to your strategy consistently, and your content and your narrative is consistent with that, you will see a lot of confidence in your team. There'll be a lot more alignment. There'll be a lot more traction built with your audience because there's a lot of clarity and direction. You know exactly where you're going. You know where you're going. Your team knows where you're going. And ultimately, you become the go-to, I like to say, for that thing, right? There's plenty of examples of this, Salesforce and HubSpot, and the go-to for inbound marketing, HubSpot, right? Amazon, the go-to, at least early on, for 2-day free shipping, fast orders, right? The go any product you want on the market, you can go there and get it, things like that. So that's kind of my overview of how we should view tactics, how we should be messaging, how we should view brand when we're looking to execute in those areas. But I'm trying to think if I missed anything. Any thoughts you have on that?
One thing that is a kind of do like a not to do. Our marketing manager actually calls this the trap, is when sometimes a leader or somebody in an organization or a brand decision maker all of a sudden has a brilliant idea or something that they really want to do. It's important for your team to be able to push back on you, or to be able to kind of like hold your horses. Make sure that everything aligns and that it's just not a new shiny object that you're trying to do, whether it's a new social platform, whether it's something, maybe you want to start a podcast. Great. Are you going to be able to be consistent with it? Does it really connect to your brand strategy? How are you going to support it? So ADD and brand and marketing is a thing, but it's really important to make sure, exactly like what you mentioned, that you're connected to your strategy and that you're doing things that you can actually be consistent with and aren't just going to be one-offs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And that happens, that can happen, I should say, pretty frequently. It's tempting and it's understandable. Like things happen that are new. You forget you reviewed your strategy in the beginning of Q1. Let's go chase this shiny object. But it's a sign for disaster.
Well, execution. So we talked about, this is kind of like the nuts and bolts of everything, like how you actually make it happen. Yeah. So how do you execute? What are these areas that people or brands should be focusing in?
So something I think we should probably preface that answer with too is just reverting back to this whole conversation, brand building, brand strategy as a whole. I think in the current, just our current environment of what brands are, it's a company-wide dedication to what you're doing. Yes, brand is kind of your external perception. That's how people view you. But in reality, it's also a decision that you're making where you're going to make investments operationally and on a business level. Sure, businesses and a business strategy involves a lot more than just brand. Brand is a segment of that. It involves the people you hire, taxes and profitability, cost of goods, all those types of things that aren't necessarily calculated or at least factored into brand from a client's perspective or a customer's perspective. But I think that's an excellent point. It is a whole business decision that you're making. And so it takes investment in every area of the business. So I think some areas to talk through, and feel free to also jump in and kind of expand on some of these. But the first one I think is good, and you brought this up, was operations. So although operations is not necessarily something that external, people will see necessarily, they won't necessarily have direct visibility into that. It is the moving parts of the machine that help you build that brand externally. So culture, the people that you hire, right? The people that you bring into the mix to fill that out. Do they understand the identity of your brand? Do they understand how to execute on that? Do they understand the directional elements of it? And also believe and have buy-in into that. If they don't, could be a lot of trouble, or you'll hit friction points or at least have turnover. Second, resources and investments. If you decide on a narrative, so if a larger company, right, decides, hey, we're gonna do this, we're gonna go here. Well, you have to kind of put your money where your mouth is, right? I think Patagonia does a good job of this. Another consumer brand is, they've said that they're about climate change and world crises around climate change and all these different elements, and even have political bents towards them. But they put their money where their mouth is. They put lots of money into those things. And so there's no dissonance between who they say they are and want to be versus how people are perceiving them, because they actually put investments into resources to make that narrative true and continue to do so. And the last point I guess I would have under operations is just fulfillment. So whether you are a service-based business, B2B or B2C, how are you carrying out what you say you're about and the narrative that you tell and the story that you tell to your customers or to your clients? Are those things backing up or at least consistent or aligned with the narrative that you're trying to tell? And I know you work on a lot of that too, so I don't know if you have any additional context to add into that.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the operational side of things gets overlooked because it usually is actually where your brand messaging is and what it's inspired from. Yeah. And so you forget maybe to tie it back to that, or brands forget to tie it back. But it's really important to do that and to not forget about the post-sale and behind the scenes experience for your clients, for your customers, and for your people. Yeah,
I think that's brilliant. And that's ongoing. It's hard work. It is really hard work. And you also may have, and that's why it's so important to, I think, have a kind of a, what have we called it before? A little bit of like a central controlling, hey, this is who we are. This is who we want to be. Because there will be friction. There'll be friction around cost. Hey, we don't want to pay for this. Well, if we don't pay for it, it's going to cost us a lot more in the long run because it's not aligned with what we want to do and who we are. So those things are really important. A little bit more externally, so brand rollout, what touch points do we look at to make sure that the brand is being represented well and fulfilled well? We can run through these, but generally it's going to be sales, creative, website, content, and then even paid media. There's probably more than that, but those are kind of the main buckets we look at. Sales from a narrative perspective, contracts, purchase points, setting expectations early in relationships. That is your point of focus even on our team. So feel free to add, more notes to that. But I know, as we talk to clients about who we want to be and the value we want to add and how we want to help them, we have conversations constantly about how to make sure that we're staying consistent in those areas. So I'm not sure if you'd have anything to add to that, just in your experience in those areas.
Well, one of the biggest hiccups that I see when I talk with leads, oftentimes when they're coming to us for help, is they'll say like, our website doesn't reflect what we do at all. And then their sales process is disjointed because they're having to spend so much time in education of what they really do, or leads are coming for them for things that don't make sense. And
Sure.
really, sales is kind of the fortunate execution piece, because oftentimes there's a person involved that can direct the ship or like correct wrong thinking as it relates to brand. But it also, if it's not aligned well, it's chaos. It's not fair to your sales team, and it's not fair to the leads that are in your pipeline.
Yeah, I'd agree. Said very well. The other areas, like I said, creative. So we tend to lump, messaging and design. We've already talked about messaging, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. But just how you're executing on creative. What does that look like? Are they all aligned with who you are, or at least who you want to be at the right time? And then tone and voice, right? Who you are, especially this is probably a lot more prevalent with consumer brands, but who you are. If you're edgy, then be edgy, right? If you're not, then don't be. You can't just come out of left field as a business to business enterprise and all of a sudden, start dropping some rough language and expect people to resonate with that. You have to be consistent with your tone and your voice. Website, content, and paid media, anything within there, these decisions you make within those spaces should not be siloed. You should never sit down and start talking about a website only on the website level. It should always go back to what problem do we need to accomplish, what problem do we need to solve for? What do we need to accomplish? What is our vision? What are our objectives? And why does this need to happen in the first place, so that it supports your brand, so that it supports your strategy? Same goes for content, same goes for paid ads. All of those things should connect back to your brand strategy and what you want to accomplish, as well as remain consistent with what that is. If you're telling a story about being an educator or a helper or a guide to your consumers, your customers, then your blogs, your PDFs, your downloads, your social media presence should back up and double down on that position. There should not be disconnect if someone sees your digital presence to who you say you want to be. Same goes even for your paid media. Your ads should look very similar to your organic content. The only difference is that you're paying for their distribution. There should not be a gap between your paid media and your organic media. But yeah, those are some key areas I know we look at. I don't know if there's any others that come up for you I want to talk about.
I think those areas are really important. But one of the things to keep in mind is that your aspirational brand, and when you're executing and changing some of these things, is going to change over the years. So even how we're looking at our brand, it's not where we're going to be in 10 years. We're not making those changes yet, because we know that as a company, we're not there yet. And so, you have to make sure that all of these tactics are in line together and lock and key, like you talked about, connected and consistent, but they're kind of at the same stages, so that not necessarily one is like leaps and bounds ahead of the other, but that they happen kind of congruently.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point. Yeah. And for even best practice too, we've talked about positioning. So what is position? It seems like timeless. It seems like it could not be time. It's kind of both. A position, I think, at least in my experience and what I've learned, is depending on the growth stage of the company, it could just be a 2 to 3 year position, and maybe you tweak that later on, right? As an early stage company becomes an enterprise level company, positioning is probably going to change a little bit, hopefully solving a little bit more heavy of a problem, or at least from a wider breadth of service. And so that may be true, but at the same time, a very large company, their position may not change for 20 years, and that's okay. Maybe they just tweak something here and there. And so it is a little bit of both, but you nailed it. I think whatever you're trying to accomplish, your messaging, your creative, whatever it is that you're executing on, should be in line with what you're trying to accomplish. Our parameter is like 9 to 18 months. What are you trying to accomplish within the next 9 to 18 months? And if anything's shifting within there, then everything should shift within that alignment, or at least do so as you move forward, right? But yeah, I think that's a great point. Great point to add.
Well, what happens though if brands don't stay consistent and connected? Like what happens?
The risk, the bad stuff that happens. I'd say a couple of key things. One, you will not build the position that you want, or at least you will not own it effectively. You could lose a large percentage of opportunity on the table. So the worst crime, I think, of any marketer business is just trying to be everything to all people. That's cliche at this point, but it's cliche for a reason. So if you are not consistent with these things, you said it before, your sales teams are going to get frustrated. This is not us speaking from this disconnected observatory tower either. We've seen it. We've been in relationships where we've seen it. We protect it internally for our own team. So just making sure that you can own that position. It's going to help your sales teams sell that position, be consistent, and pretty much own exactly what it is that you want to do or the problem you want to solve. Second is, I think, degenerating what you've built and causing confusion. So what I just mean by that is, if you have a lot of different directions or these new shiny things you're chasing after, both internally, there's going to be a ton of confusion, and also externally, people don't know what it is that you do. They don't know how to file you away, right? Everything we've been talking about in terms of marketing and branding, it really is simplified down to making sense to the customer. And if it doesn't, then you're likely and almost to a promise going to lose opportunities. And the last, you mentioned it earlier, so I won't spend too much time on it, but you mentioned it around like time and cost. If you're always chasing after new things, as a company, you're always going to be starting from scratch. Where do we go? What do we do? You're always rethinking direction. I won't get to, it's not my forte around like culture and morale, but I know from experience that can be really, really frustrating. Like, which direction are we going? Why are we changing things every day? I can't accomplish anything. So yeah, if you don't have connectivity or consistency back to your strategy and what you're trying to accomplish in a story that you're telling, really inefficient. You're going to cause a lot of frustration. And I think a lot of that can be internal. Quite a bit of that can be external, but I would say that I think they're self-sufficient as far as the issues that can arise if you're not maintaining these things. And maybe that resonates with a lot of people. I know it resonates with clients that we've worked with in the past and continue to, and it's hard to stay aligned. It's hard to do those things because there's so many shiny things asking for your attention.
Yeah, it helps you set your priorities and like keep them straight.
Mm-hmm. All of this is solely for those types of things. That's what I learned when I learned, right, even today. I'm like, yeah, I think the biggest value to it is just having decision-making devices.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the biggest value for us as a brand. It's like, what do we do and what do we not do? Well, is this aligned with who we want to be, the narrative we want to tell? And sometimes it gets old. It's like, oh, well, we could go do this shiny thing. It's like, you could, but that also means you're going to sacrifice a ton of the momentum and direction and clarity that you're putting into what you've tried to build. So,
well, this is great. Thank you so much, Frank.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, Amanda. Super fun. I hope everyone has enjoyed. If you watched, please don't hesitate to reach out, ask any questions you want. We look forward to hopefully talking to you.
Yeah, we'll see you later.
All right.